Hello students, a very good afternoon. So today we'll start a revision topic on breathing and exchange of gases. So I hope you can hear me well. So if there is any technical issues, I wanted you to know. So I'll launch a technical issue poll. So please answer this poll so that we will understand if everything is going fine with respect to audio and video. YouTube students, you can just put your thoughts on the chat box and let me know if everything is okay. So, all right then. So let's start our class. So first of all, we'll understand what is breathing and how is it related with respiration. So if we generally consider all the living organisms on the planet, all living organisms have a necessity to breathe, or they have the necessity for the exchange of gases. So the required gas would be oxygen in most of the cases because it is required for oxidative phosphorylation or production of ATP molecules. So now two things can be understood here. One is a breathing, that is just a mechanical process where we fix a required gas into our biological system. And then the respiration, where that fixed gas is used by our living cells to make food, and the waste is produced in that process as carbon dioxide, water, etc. So before we start understanding the details of this topic, so let me ask you one question. Which of the following is entirely made up of cartilage? So you have nasal septum, and then you have trachea, larynx, and glottis. Okay. So I will try to launch an MCQ poll. You can answer this in a minute. Okay. 1 second. Yeah. I have launched an MCQ poll. You have a minute to answer this question. And the question is about which of the following is entirely made up of cartilage? Okay. All right, students, I will just end the poll and we will try to find the right answer. So if you have your right answer in your mind, okay, keep it in your mind. And a few people who have your options, let's see if your options are correct. Fine. Which of the following is entirely made up of cartilage? And our options were nasal septum, trachea, larynx, and glottis, right? So when it comes to the first option, that is the nasal septum. Nasal septum is the, when you see your nose and the center of the nose, you have a septum or a partition. So the septum is made up of a cartilage, and this cartilage is called as hyaline cartilage. Along with hyaline cartilage, there are so many other bones as well as integrated with the nasal septum. So the first option is wrong. When it comes to the second option, the trachea or the windpipe, the trachea or the windpipe is a combination of C-shaped, cartilaginous structures called as hyaline cartilage, right? And they're integrated with fibroelastic muscles. So our option B is also wrong. But when it comes to the option C, that is the larynx, larynx is composed of several cartilages, and it is strictly made up of cartilage. So our option C is correct. Okay. So let us see our topic today, that is the breathing and respiration. So when you talk about respiratory organs, every organism have developed and evolved a specific respiratory organs. You can consider from the more unicellular organisms. If you see unicellular organisms, the gaseous exchange merely happens through their cell surfaces, right? So similarly, when you talk about higher organisms, like the organisms which are having up to cellular level organization or tissue level organizations, like for example, if you take an example of sponge, which is of cellular level of organization, and coelentrates, which are tissue level of organizations. So these organisms, they exhibit their own level of respiratory organs. For example, in this case, the exchange of gases is merely simple diffusion and it happens throughout the body surface. Okay. So take example of little more higher organisms like earthworms. So if you see earthworms, they have cutaneous respiration. That means the exchange of gases happens through their skin surface. Correct? No. So on the skin surface, the skin is very richly supplied with blood capillaries, and the skin is very moist, so that this moistness of the skin will help fix the air from the atmosphere and it helps in breathing, right? So this is about that. And if you see more advanced organisms like arthropods and mollusks, so take about arthropods have they have this tubular network like structures called as tracheal tubes. Okay, and they have spiracles where the exchange of gases will take place. Okay, and in some of the arthropods which are aquatic, like the prawn, so they have their own type of gills that they have evolved. And if you take mollusks like your octopus or stingrays, okay, so they have their octopuses and squids, right? So they have their own respiratory mechanisms. So when you see some of the higher organisms which are terrestrial in nature, so we have evolved a complex respiratory systems in the form of lungs, right? So the lungs of this terrestrial organisms help in exchange of gases. Similarly, if you see fishes use gills for the exchange of gases, whereas reptiles, birds, mammals, okay, including us, we are mammals, right? So we all respire through lungs. Our ancestors, like amphibians, who are the first terrestrial organisms, if you see their body has evolved both the ways of respiration. They do both cutaneous respiration, that is through their moist skin, as well as through the lungs. So frog uses this mechanism whenever it wants to dive deeper in the water. So it uses the skin surface for the respiration, whereas when it is in the surface, it uses lungs for the exchange of gases. Okay. So if you see the human respiratory system is quite elaborate, right? And it is made up of several sets of minor to major organs. So let us see one by one what is our respiratory system made up of. Our respiratory system starts with a pair of nostrils, okay, which begins at the nose, right? Our nostrils enter, leading to a chamber called as nasal chamber. And if you see the nasal chamber or the nasal passage, it is lined up by a special type of cilia called as nasal cilia, which in turn protects our body, right, from preventing any of the dust particles from entering through our nose while we respire. So if you see the nose, the walls of the nose, that is especially the lower part of the nose, is very hard, right, when you touch it through your fingers. So that is because the upper palate, I mean like the rough palate of your mouth, as well as the roof of your nose, they are the same. Okay, the floor of the nose and the roof of your mouth, especially in the rough palate region, they share the common a common floor, like, okay. So that is why it is hard. And as we move through the nasal chamber, and the nasal cavity opens into a pharynx. So pharynx is quite a structure where it is very important for separating the process of deglutition and respiration. See what happens whenever we respire, we do not, whenever we breathe, we do not swallow. Whenever we swallow, we do not breathe. So this is a very beautiful mechanism that helps in separating the food from windpipe and wind from food pipe, right? So how is that happening? So that mechanism is, done by your pharynx. And pharynx are of three types. Okay, three different anatomical areas are there in your pharynx. One is nasopharynx, and then you have oropharynx, and then you have laryngopharynx. Nasopharynx extends from the nasal cavity and all the way till the oropharynx. So here, when you see the oropharynx, right? So whenever you swallow, usually what happens, the the posterior part of your roof of your mouth, especially, which is called as a soft palate. I'll write it here. okay, which is called as a soft palate. So the soft palate, what happens? It moves anteriorly, right? It moves above. As it moves upward, now your tongue will press against this, okay, against this epiglottis. When the tongue presses against this epiglottis, which is like a cartilaginous structure, okay, when it presses against the epiglottis, see this epiglottis will start folding over the glottis, blocking the windpipe, so that the food pipe is open for whatever the food that is being swallowed by you. Understood? So now that is what is oropharynx is doing. Then the laryngopharynx will lead to your windpipe where there is larynx. Larynx is also called as a windpipe. It is made up of cartilage. So basically what happens whenever you try to, actually, whenever you try to speak, you're actually, moving some air into this larynx. So that this air that is moved into this larynx will create vibrations, and in turn it starts helping production of sound. Okay, so we understood what is larynx, and I told you glottis is an entrance of your windpipe, and epiglottis is a thin elastic cartilaginous flap that prevents the food from entering the larynx. Correct? So next we will see what is happening, what is the next further structures with respect to your respiratory system. And the next important structure is trachea. After the larynx leads to, okay, a pipe-like structure called as trachea. So this trachea is commonly called as windpipe. And if you see the trachea is made up of around 15 to 20 C-shaped ring-like structures called as tracheal cartilage. And between this tracheal cartilage, there is a stitching, okay, between one cartilage to another cartilage, which is made up of fibroelastic connective tissue. So this trachea is very, very helpful. Okay. Why it is very, very helpful? Whenever I want to perform forced expiration, okay, whenever I want to remove excessive air which is in my lungs or in my respiratory chamber, so that time my trachea will compress. It has a capacity of compression, right? It can change its size. So that compression will help me in forced expiration. Did you understand? Okay, the trachea will actually stop at the fifth vertebral column. That is your fifth, for example, you have your spinal cord, isn't it? So your spinal cord starts from the base of the skull and it goes through the neck, and then you have your back, that is your thorax region. So this thorax region is called as, you have your vertebral columns, right? Vertebral bones. So here at the thoracic chamber, you have the fifth vertebral bone. That is where your trachea stops or ends. Here at the fifth vertebral bone, your trachea will divide it into two important, left and right sections. Now this left and right division, okay, that we call it as primary bronchi. Okay, trachea divides into left and right primary bronchi. Now, if you see your lungs, so the lungs are a closed structures, right? So these lungs, they provide a space for entry of your trachea, right, or the primary bronchi. So the primary bronchi makes an entry into your lungs along with the blood vessels like arteries, veins, as well as lymphatic vessels and neural tissue or nerves. All of them make an entry at the same point, and this point of entry at the lungs is called as hilum. Okay, so at the hilum region, okay, what is entering? The primary bronchi enters. Once the primary bronchi enters into your lungs, now what happens? The primary bronchi goes under a sequential, branching. Like it forms primary bronchi will become secondary bronchi will become tertiary bronchi, and tertiary bronchi will lead to terminal bronchi. Now here, if you see this structure, it is so beautifully, okay, terminated that it would look like, okay, bronchial branches, right? Like how you have the roots of your tree. Similar to the roots of your tree, you have all these tubules dividing and redividing until it becomes smaller and smaller, and it leads to a sac-like cluster or clustered sac-like structures called as alveoli. And where is alveoli present? Alveoli is present at the terminal bronchi. Now, if you see all these bronchi and bronchioles, they're all lined up by the same cartilage, which helps them from not collapsing. Since we breathe at a different pace, like we can change our breathing rate and we can respire high rate when you're running, or right, when you're very scared, your breathing becomes faster, or sometimes when you're in cold water, your breathing becomes shallow. So at that point, you change the rate of your breathing. So according to the rate of the breathing, suddenly when you breathe more, suddenly or something like that, there is a possibility of your windpipe collapsing. So it does not allow for your windpipes to collapse or bronchi to collapse. That is why these cartilaginous structures are present. Okay. So as I said, each terminal bronchi will give rise to this very thin sac-like structures called as alveoli, and they're highly vascularized bags. Now, why do we call them as highly vascularized bags? See, this is where, see, you can see that there is alveolar colonies. Okay. If you see individual alveoli, the individual alveoli, like how I said, your primary bronchi is becoming secondary, your secondary bronchi is dividing into tertiary bronchi, and your tertiary bronchi is again dividing into terminal bronchi to form a what? Bronchial tree, right? So if you see the division, it's becoming smaller and smaller. As you can see in this video, it's becoming smaller and smaller. As your bronchi is becoming smaller and smaller, along with the bronchi, even the blood vessels that are entering, it's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. As it becomes smaller, ultimately it would have reached the size of capillaries. And these capillaries will line up your bronchi in a highly networked fashion. Okay. And this network helps in gases exchange. Okay. So that is where the gases exchange is happening. Did you understand? So if you see the overall structure of the lungs, right? The overall structure of the lungs, we have two lungs, which is present in our thoracic chamber. And each of the lung, we have fissures, which divide our lung into different lobes. For example, if you see your right lung, the right lung is made up of, you can see here that it is made up of three different parts. Okay, these are done by fissures. And similarly, left lung is divided into two lobes, 1 and 2 lobes. Okay. So if you see, the lungs are protected by a double membrane system called as pleural membrane. Okay. So this pleural membrane, the outer pleura and the inner pleural membrane, there is a space called as pleural cavity. And within this pleural cavity, there is this fluid called as pleural fluid, which is a lubricant or a surfactant that is present between the two layers, which helps in reducing the friction. So see, lungs are highly sensitive organs, and here there can be a possible damage that could happen for your lungs while you're mechanically breathing at different paces, right? So that is why, to prevent any mechanical damage, okay, so now there is this pleura, which helps in reducing the friction between the lungs and the other parts of your body. Okay, it also maintains the temperature. All right. So we talked about pleura. So you understood what is pleura, right? So next, so when we talk about the lungs, right? So now the lungs, the position of the lungs is very well placed. Now this position of the lungs is placed in our thoracic chamber. So the upper thoracic chamber is made up of sternum, and the posterior on the dorsal part of your thoracic chamber is made up of vertebral column, and the entire thoracic cavity is protected by your thoracic cage or the rib cage. So there are rib cage present, and between this rib cage there are intercostal muscles, which gives the elasticity for your lungs, for your thoracic cavity, so that you can breathe. And below your thoracic cavity or thoracic chamber is the a mass of muscle like structure called as diaphragm. We'll talk about it. So before we go into more details, okay, so I have a question for you. In humans, oblique fissures are associated with left lungs, right lungs, both lungs, and none of the above. So students, I will have you some polls. Okay, so you can take a minute and answer this question. The fissures are associated with what lungs? Right lungs, left lungs, both lungs, or none of them? It's a very direct question. You can answer it very easily. Okay, students, I'm going to stop the polls. So you have your answers already. Let's check if these answers are correct. Okay. So see, oblique fissures are the ones which separate or divide your lungs into different lobes. You can see that in your right lung, the oblique fissures divide your lungs into 3 lobes, whereas in your left lung, it is dividing into 2 lobes. So that is why the oblique fissures are associated with both the lungs. So our option C is correct. Okay, people. So now if you see our entire respiratory system, we can divide our entire respiratory system into 2 important anatomical zones, right? One zone is called as a conduction zone. Other one is called as the respiratory zone. See, what is conduction zone? From the beginning of your nostrils all the way till your terminal bronchi. Okay. There is no exchange of gases happening. If you see all these parts like nose, nostrils, or your pharynx, or the larynx, and the trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi, all of them, what they're doing is, as the air enters, they will humidify the air and bring them into our body temperature. Okay. So this bringing the air from the atmospheric air to body temperature will enhance the capacity of the gases that can be fixed into our body. That means the rate of gas that can be fixed into our system will be increased, right? So that is one thing, humidification of air or increasing the temperature of the air. Second point is the entire conduction zone is lined up by respiratory mucosal cells. So these respiratory mucosal cells will always keep your respiratory tract very moist. So that is in turn helping the same process, correct? No? So next one is, if you see the entire respiratory tract, it is lined up by the special type of cells called as pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So this pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium, what it is doing, whenever dust particles, whenever there is any of these antigens that enter through your respiratory process, so or breathing process, it will have cilia. For example, what is pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium? So let us say that this epithelia lies your respiratory tract. They have these hair-like structures that are lined up. Okay. So these hair-like structures that are lined up are called as cilia, right? So whenever there is dust particles or debris that is stuck here and there, so the beating of the cilia is towards one particular direction, that is towards upward movement. Now it mixes with the respiratory mucus and it will become a sputum, and the sputum comes to your throat and you are given an option whether to swallow the sputum or to spit it out. Okay. And that is how the debris are removed out of your respiratory tract. So this is about conduction zone. So what did we talk about conduction zone? First thing is it will humidify the atmospheric air so that when the temperature is very, very moderate, okay, or very accurate temperatures, then the exchange of gases becomes very, very easier. Next one is it clears foreign particles from the respiratory tract, correct? No? And then what else did we talk about it? So this respiratory chambers is highly anatomically airtight chambers. Okay. So since they are airtight chambers, so you can understand that they also have a play. They also play a role whenever it comes to conscious breathing or forced inspiration or forced expiration. Okay. So if you see the anatomical location of our lungs, as I said, the thoracic chamber is dorsally made up of vertebral column. So that, okay, that is the backside of your body. It is made up of vertebral column, and ventrally it is made up of a sternum, that is the breastbone. And then you have the ribs, correct, on the lower side of the correct. No, there are ribs and sternum at the ventral side, and at the lower side, correct? No, at the lower side of the ventral side, you have your dome-shaped diaphragm, and this dome-shaped diaphragm is very, very important because it helps in some of the breathing processes. Okay, so fine. So let's talk about steps in respiration. So the steps in respiration, first it includes a mechanical process of breathing itself. So what is mechanical process? Breathing is also called as pulmonary ventilation. In this process, the atmospheric air is drawn into the lungs and the carbon dioxide that is collected in the lungs is thrown out of the body through expiration. So this is breathing process. Once you breathe the atmospheric air is very rich in oxygen, and this oxygen is fixed into your red blood cells and it is transported across the body. As the transportation of the oxygen takes place across the body, now the oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusion takes place at the tissue levels. The tissue takes up the oxygen and gives the carbon dioxide to the blood. Now the blood picks up this carbon dioxide, goes to the lungs and delivers the carbon dioxide to the lungs and picks up the oxygen from the lungs. So these are the essential steps that happens in respiration. So let us see one by one. So first we will understand what is mechanism of breathing. Next we will see what are the factors that affects the process of respiration. So first one, that is mechanism of breathing. Your breathing can be broadly divided into two stages. One is inspiration, other one is expiration. Correct? So when you talk about inspiration, what is inspiration? Inspiration is taking in or drawing in atmospheric air into your lungs. That is called as inspiration. What is expiration? When you release the air that is filled in your lungs out into the atmosphere, that is called as expiration. So in simple terms, this is how it would look like anatomically. Now, if you see both inspiration and expiration, it is a purely mechanical process. It is a physical process. There is no exchange of gases happening in breathing process. So let us understand how this mechanism of inspiration happens. As I said, our anatomy is very, very elaborate, and it is not just lungs, okay, that participate in the process of respiration. All the accessory structures, where is your lung placed? What are the accessory organs that are supporting your lungs? All of them influence your body to draw sufficient amount of air every time you inspire or expire. So what is happening during inspiration? First of all, the inspiration process is based upon your atmospheric pressure. So inside your lungs, our body creates a low atmospheric pressure within our thoracic chamber. So that low atmospheric pressure within our thoracic chamber creates a negative pressure in our lungs. When it creates a negative pressure in our lungs, now the air from the higher atmospheric pressure will start moving towards the area of lower atmospheric pressure. Okay, so this is the overall physical concept of it. Let's see what are the other things that are helping or supporting the process of inspiration. Okay, so if you talk about inspiration, it starts with your brain. The centers, the respiratory centers of your brain signal your some of the muscles which are present in your thoracic chamber, such as your diaphragm and the external costal muscles. Okay, so what are external intercostal muscles? See, you have one rib here, you have another rib here, and there are muscles that are between. There are muscles that are between the ribs, and these are called as costal muscles. If they are towards the inside, they are called as internal intercostal muscles. If they are towards the outside, they are called as external intercostal muscles. Did you understand? Okay. So now what happens when the brain signals these structures? What are those structures? The diaphragm as well as the intercostal muscles. When it signals, now what happens? Contraction happens. When it contracts, your diaphragm moves anterior-posteriorly downwards, whereas your external intercostal muscles, they contract, okay, lift the ribs above and forward. When the ribs move upward and forward, now it will increase the volume of thoracic chamber. When the volume of thoracic chamber increases, in what direction? In anterior-posterior axis, correct? No? When it increases, now what happens? It will create this space for the air to move from higher pressure to lower pressure. Okay, so what is happening? Contraction of external and intercostal muscles take place, which lifts the ribs upward and forward, correct? No, whereas your the contraction of your diaphragm does what? It will move in the anterior posterior direction, increasing the thoracic volume. So the increase in thoracic volume leads to the process of inspiration. You can see here, as your diaphragm moves downward, okay, and as your contraction of your external intercostal muscles happens, right? So when that happens, you can see there is a huge increase in the thoracic chamber. When there is huge increase in the thoracic chamber, now it's like a balloon. Okay, when you pull the walls of the balloon, how the air enters into the balloon, similarly the air starts moving from atmosphere to into the lungs. Okay, now as I said, once you increase your thoracic volume, correct, no, pulmonary volume also increases. When pulmonary volume decreases, the intrapulmonary pressure is less than atmospheric pressure. And when intrapulmonary pressure is less than atmospheric pressure, air will move from outside to the inside. That will complete the process of inspiration. Okay. So on a general basis, a healthy human should respire or breathe 12 to 16 times a minute. Okay. And we can use spirometer for measuring the rate of respiration or breathing. Fine. Now, when it comes to expiration, again, the expiration is also controlled by our neural activity. The brain actually switches off its command to these tissues which are contracting, like diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. When it is switched off, there is no current passing, or there is nobody to tell what to do for these muscles. So when nobody is there to command these muscles, what they will do, from contraction stage, they will collapse. When they relax, now what will happen? They will start applying pressure on the thoracic chamber. As they apply pressure on the thoracic chamber, now the thoracic chamber's volume decreases. When the thoracic volume chamber decreases, it starts applying pressure on the walls of your lungs. As the relaxation keeps happening and the lung feels more and more pressure in the thoracic volume, now what happens? The expiration starts taking place. Okay, it is a very, very passive process. If you see expiration is highly passive process. It does not require any energy at all. Okay, so that will lead to expulsion of air from the lungs. Okay, people. One of the most important topics that we have to consider here in the session is respiratory volumes and capacities. Okay, and why do we have to study respiratory volume and capacities? This will give us an accurate idea of what is the normal rate of breathing and respiration in a very healthy man. If somebody is having emphysema, if somebody, for example, is having COVID, or if their lungs are infected, if they have pneumonia, are they functioning in a normal sense? Or is their lungs able to receive exact amount of air that a normal human being is supposed to do? Or when they expire, are they expiring a healthy amount of air outside? Or is there a problem in expiration or their volume of expiration? Okay. So these are very important to understand significantly what is really happening with respect to our lungs. So let us see what is happening with the respiratory volume. So the first important respiratory volume is your tidal volume. So what is tidal volume, students? So whenever in my relaxed state, I will inspire or I will expire. So whenever in my normal state, I inspire or expire, this volume of air that I normally take in or leave out, it is called as tidal volume. So the normal amount of volume that I take in or take out is approximately around 500 ml. Okay, so if you take a healthy man will respire up to 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air every minute. Okay, that is called as tidal volume. What is inspiratory reserve volume? Now, inspiratory reserve volume says that after I have inspired, okay, I have taken the air in. Now, what will I do? I will try to take more air in. I will forcefully inspire. So this on forceful inspiration, I will be able to add even little more air into my lungs, right? So on forceful expiration, after normal inspiration, so this volume of air is called as inspiratory reserve volume. And this averages around 2,500 ml to 3,000 ml in a healthy human being. Now, what is expiratory reserve volume? Similarly to the inspiratory reserve volume, what will I do? I will do normal expiration. After normal expiration, I will do forceful expiration. After I do forceful expiration, now I have thrown out excessive air out of my lungs. So that volume is called as expiratory reserve volume. That is around 1,000 to 1,100 ml. Now, what is residual volume, people? Now, residual volume is the amount of air that is remaining after forceful expiration. I have done the forceful expiration. Is there any amount of air that is left in my lungs? Definitely yes. Your lungs is always with air. If the air is missing out of your lungs, it will be a very big problem for your lungs. Correct? No? Why it will be a big problem for your lungs? Because it will collapse. With this, anatomical air should be available at all times, okay, to keep the lungs from not collapsing. So after forced expiration, the remaining air in my lungs is called as residual volume, and this is around 1,100 ml to 1,200 ml in a healthy human being. Okay, fine. Using these 4 respiratory volumes, we can derive other volumes. Okay, so let us see what are the other volumes we can derive of these 4 important volumes. What are those? We have tidal volume, inspirator reserve volume, expirator reserve volume, and then we have residual volume. We use these four and we'll construct different types of volumes. Let's see what are those. First one is inspiratory capacity. What is inspiratory capacity? Now, inspiratory capacity can be defined as, for example, if you have a person and a person inspires, right? And then what he will do, sorry, give me a second. So inspiratory capacity, okay. If you have a normal person and then after normal expiration, how much of air he can inspire, that is called as inspiratory capacity. Okay. So how do we calculate inspiratory capacity? We add tidal volume, that is normal expiration or normal inspiration, and then we will add up with inspiratory reserve volume. Tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume will give you what? Inspiratory capacity. Now, what is expiratory capacity? In expiratory capacity, what we will do? After normal inspiration, we will do forceful expiration. Understood? So when we do forceful expiration after normal expiration, that is called as expiratory capacity. That will include what? Tidal volume plus expiratory reserve volume. Next one. What is functional residual volume, or it is also called as FRC? Now, what will happen after normal expiration? Some of the air will remain in your lungs. After expiring, some of the air will still remain in your lungs. So this is called as functional residual volume. I told you, this is very, very important, functional residual volume, because it will help your chest from not collapsing. So how do we measure this functional residual volume? That will be equal to expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. If you add these two, you will get your functional residual capacity. Okay. Next one. What is vital capacity? Now, vital capacity is, it defines how much is the maximum volume of air a person can breathe after forceful expiration. I've done forceful expiration. Now I will try to add as much air as possible. Okay, and try to understand how much is my vital capacity. Now, how do we measure vital capacity? You add expiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, and inspiratory reserve volume. That if you add, you will get your vital capacity. Understood? Now, what is total lung capacity? Total lung capacity means it is the volume that you can accommodate in your lungs. Total volume of air that you can accommodate in your lungs after forceful inspiration. You have done a forceful inspiration, and how much can you put air? How much amount of air you can put inside your lungs? That is called as total lung capacity. And how do we measure total lung capacity? You take residual volume, expiratory reserve volume, and tidal volume, and you have inspiratory reserve volume, and you add all of these. RV, ERV, IRV, and TV. If you add, you will get total lung capacity. Or you can just take vital capacity and you can add with residual volume. Okay, RV plus VC will be again equal to total lung capacity. Did you understand, students? Okay, so this is about lung capacities. All right. So lung capacities are very, very significant for us to understand our pulmonary state or how our lungs are functioning. Understood? Now, coming to breathing, which is a mechanical process, now our body has the ability to switch our breathing mechanisms. For example, when we are in a calm state, when we are in a singing state, whenever we are swimming, whenever we are in some sports. Now, what we'll do, we will do diaphragmatic breathing or diaphragm breathing. It is also called as deep breathing or soft breathing. Here, whenever you do diaphragm breathing, deep breathing, or soft breathing, here your body will be able to fix more amount of air into your tissues. Whereas your chest breathing, whenever you're like completely cold, okay, when you're in ice bath, okay, or suddenly when you are put in ice bath, or suddenly when you are running very, very hard, you can't breathe too high. You have a shallow breath because you are avoiding for your cramping of your diaphragm or cramping of your lower ribs or something like this. So what you will do, you will go for shallow breathing. And shallow breathing is only for a very little amount of air that has to be fixed. Other than that, if you compare this breathing, diaphragmatic breathing is very, very best. Okay, and that is practicing diaphragmatic breathing will give you more athletic capabilities. Okay, and it will also help you energize your body way better compared to that of chest breathing. Okay, fine. So coming to exchange of gases. So okay, we will try to finish this topic and then we'll stop here. Okay, so let us talk about exchange of gases. if you see where the gaseous exchange take place, already we talked about in terminal bronchi, there are colony of alveoli, and alveoli performs the function of exchange of gases. But if we see alveoli is not just made up of one type of cells. It is made up of type 1 alveoli, type 2 alveoli, macroalveolar macrophages, etc. So if you see alveolar, if you take some of the alveoli, some of the alveoli, they do not function in any of the gases exchange. Their role is to only, okay, produce alveolar surfactant. Okay, so this alveolar surfactant will react with the water molecules that is present in your air, and it will make the alveoli very non-sticky and always very slippery. So why does it do this? So that it does not collapse and the lungs do not collapse. When it comes to the functional alveolar cells, the alveolar cells participate in gaseous exchange where they have they create a specific membrane called as respiratory membrane in association with the blood capillaries. Okay, and that is how the exchange of gases takes place. So let's see what's happening. So now, as I said, the exchange of gases takes place between the alveolar walls as well as your blood capillaries. Now, whenever a gas has to move, and when we talk about diffusion of gases, always it has to happen from higher concentration to lower concentration. Correct? No? So, solubility of gases totally depends upon the temperature, the thickness of the membrane, okay, and some of the other factors also influence or hydrogen ion concentration, etc. All of these factors affect in gaseous exchange. Now, let us see some of the aspects that helps in gaseous exchange. All right. So as I said, there is a pressure that is applied by a gas which is of higher concentration. So for example, take a vessel, and in this vessel, you have atmospheric air. In this vessel, we have different gases like nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, etc. So we have several gases in them. And we know that in our atmosphere, our nitrogen has the highest volume, as well as next comes oxygen, next comes carbon dioxide and hydrogen, correct? So if you see what our gases can do, whenever there is a gas of certain concentration, so these gases, when they are in a container, they start bombarding the walls of the container, applying a certain amount of pressure. So this pressure applied by the gas molecules of a certain nature, this we call it as partial pressure, correct? No? More concentration of a gas you have, they apply more partial pressure on the walls of the container. Did you understand? So this partial pressure is one of the major contributing factors for the gaseous exchange that is happening in our lungs. Okay. So now take an example. When I breathe in the atmospheric air, now which partial pressure will be higher? Partial pressure of oxygen will be higher, or partial pressure of carbon dioxide will be higher? It is very common for us to just think about it. Concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere is very, very high. So the partial pressure of oxygen in our lungs, when we just freshly breathe the air inside, so our partial pressure of oxygen is higher compared to that of carbon dioxide. Okay. Now, when you talk about the other location, for example, if you go near your tissues, okay, near your tissues, you have your cells that are metabolically active. They are performing catabolism of your glucose, and they're breaking down the glucose to produce energy, and the byproduct is your carbon dioxide. So your tissues are very, very rich in carbon dioxide, and they're very, very low in oxygen. So now what happens here? Obviously, your tissues have higher partial pressure of carbon dioxide compared to that of the blood vessels that are carrying oxygen-rich blood, correct? No, as simple as that. So this pressure, this concentration gradient becomes a defining factor for the exchange of gases, okay? So as I said, when the air enters your lungs, correct, your atmospheric air has higher partial pressure of oxygen and lower partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So the air moves from higher partial pressure to lower partial pressure. So it moves from the alveoli to the red blood cells, and the red blood cells fix this oxygen through hemoglobin, right? So as the hemoglobin picks up this oxygen, and it moves towards the tissue. And at the same junction, now the blood that is coming from the body towards the lung, it is very rich in carbon dioxide and very less in oxygen. Okay, the blood that is coming from body to the lungs, they are very rich in carbon dioxide and they're very less in oxygen. So the deoxygenated blood or the carbon dioxide rich blood has higher partial pressure of carbon dioxide and low partial pressure of oxygen. So that is why the carbon dioxide moves from blood to the alveoli, and through alveoli we breathe out, okay, the carbon dioxide. All right. So this is how the partial pressure actually helps in gases exchange. So if you see the solubility of gases, carbon dioxide has the highest solubility compared to that of oxygen. It is around 20 to 25 times high soluble gas compared to that of oxygen. So that is why it can easily diffuse through any diffusion membranes. Okay. So this is about how the gases exchange takes place. Correct? No? Partial pressure. Next, when we talk about the membrane that is contributing for gases exchange, I told this membrane has a specific name, and this membrane we call it as respiratory membrane. So what is happening in respiratory membrane? Here, the respiratory membrane is made up of three important layers. One is the first thin squamous epithelial layer of alveoli, and the second layer is endothelium of alveolar capillaries and basement substance between them. So what are those three layers? First layer is you have the layer of squamous epithelial cells of your alveoli. And the second layer is of your endothelium of the blood capillaries of alveoli. And the third layer is the basement membrane that is between these two layers. So now what is happening here? This contributes in exchange of gases since it becomes a respiratory membrane. Okay. So if you see the anatomical thickness of this membrane, it is less than a millimeter. Okay. It is very less than a millimeter, so thin. That is why the temperature, the hydrogen ion concentration, the thickness of your respiratory membrane, as well as if you see the partial pressure, these are the factors that affect the diffusion of oxygen through alveoli and the carbon dioxide from tissues to alveoli. Okay. So now let us stop this session and we'll continue from next class. All right. Okay, students, thank you. I'll end this session now. If you have any doubts, you can post them on the messages. Okay. And we'll see. I see you in the tomorrow classes, and we'll start talking with transport of gases, and we'll see what are the factors that affect in transport of gases. All right, students. Thank you very much for the session. Bye bye. Have a nice day. Take care.